Every single one of the 599 refugees the US admitted last month was a white South African. In fact, so was every other refugee admitted this year. Since October 1st, 2025, the US has accepted 6,668 refugees. Of those, 6,665 were white South Africans. 3 admitted last November were from Afghanistan. No other refugees were admitted. So the way I learned about this actually was I was watching a debate between 2 people, and one of the debaters asked the other, obviously knowing the statistic beforehand, let's say we've admitted 7,000 people into the US as refugees since 2025. What percentage of those would need to be white for you to start asking questions like, is the refugee admitting process in the US racially motivated? And the other person dipped, dived, and dodged the question a whole bunch of different ways. It ended up revealing that it was more than 99%, that literally only 3 were not white. Now, personally, I tend to avoid ascribing racist tendencies to this administration when just like negligence or stupidity can be applied. But when you look at this kind of thing and you consider that the vast majority of these people are white Afrikaners from South Africa, that it does make you seriously start to ask that kind of a question, that is this racially motivated? Are they purposefully not admitting, say, black African refugees from any country at all for racial reasons? For reference, the US admitted 100,000 refugees in 2024. So it seems not only have they significantly reduced the amount of refugees they're admitting just in general, but that they're significantly skewing the types of refugees that they're admitting and the ones that they're denying in favor of white people in general. In October, the Trump administration announced that it would cut the number of refugees admitted per year to the US to 7,500, practically all of whom will be white. A country that has made its name as a haven for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, the United States has long accepted refugees in numbers an order of magnitude greater and from all over the world. The Trump figures mark a precipitous drop from fiscal years 2022 to 2024 under Biden. In keeping with tradition, the annual limit was 125,000. A presidential memo from September, which I believe was right around the time that Elon Musk was having a significant influence on the whole Doge thing and was in the Trump administration, the refugees accepted, quote, shall primarily be among Afrikaners from South Africa and, quote, other victims of illegal or unjust discrimination in their respective homelands. This seems to be in line with allegations that Trump of the last couple of years, has sort of embraced the great replacement theory that white people are sort of being like effectively genocided out of the population in not only the US, but around the world and in places like South Africa. The Trump administration sees Afrikaners, a South African ethnic group descended primarily from European settlers, as victims of white genocide. A racist conspiracy theory promoted by many on the far right, notably Elon Musk. That's exactly what I was just saying. I swear I didn't read that paragraph before I made those statements. In May, the US increased the number of white South Africans it planned to admit by 10,000 to 17,500, claiming that unforeseen developments in South Africa created an emergency refugee situation, including South African immigration officials raiding a U.S. refugee processing center in the country, arresting 7 Kenyan nationalists whom they alleged were working at the facility illegally. This is apparently at the exact same time that we're cutting presidential aid funding to South Africa, a program that has literally saved like 20 million plus lives over the last 20 years or something like that, for seemingly little reason at all, right? That it's a paltry amount of money to the U.S. and has a significant positive impact on the lives of those that are inflicted with HIV or AIDS all throughout Africa, and especially so in South Africa, since South Africa has the highest rate of those infected with HIV and AIDS of all of Africa. The State Department said the estimated cost of resettling those additional 10,000 Afrikaner refugees would be around $100 million. So yeah, like I said before, I tend to not attribute racism to what can be attributed to just general incompetence or stupidity, but something like this very clearly is, at least in part, if not entirely, racially motivated, and adds fuel to the fire that is the argument that a lot of other people make, supported by various other data points of what this administration has been doing, that they are in fact racist and have racist tendencies and motivations behind their decision making in various different ways. So yeah, much like the politicization of the FEMA disaster aid relief program, this is the kind of thing that historians will not look back on favorably. That this will tarnish his legacy as an objective, good faith political actor, and that you'd think that if he cared about his legacy, which he very, very clearly does from a narcissistic perspective, that like this is just such an easy thing to do, to capitulate those kinds of people, to just not be biased in this regard, or at least so brazenly biased. Literally, it's a 99.9% white people only refugee acceptance rate, which is crazy, okay? There's really it's very hard to interpret that as anything but racially motivated. Even if we are going to accept the argument that these white Afrikaners Myanmars deserve to be admitted to the United States as refugees. I'm not even going to touch the argument that like what they're experiencing there is not worthy of refugee status, okay? Let's fully accept that for argument's sake. There are so many other examples of other countries around the world where the situation is far worse and that refugee status should be available to people living there, or at least some people living there. Places like South Sudan, places like Somalia, places like Ukraine, places like the Congo, the Central African Republic, so many places around the world. So yeah, this just looks bad. this just looks bad. And like I try to not attribute racism because it just sounds like a boogeyman, and usually you can attribute it more to incompetence or stupidity, but this looks kind of racist, guys. This looks kind of racist. So yeah.